Hey everyone, welcome back. So, you wanted to get to the bottom of testing libraries,
Yeah.
right? So we did a deep dive. We looked at articles,
hmm
we looked at code examples, all sorts of stuff to really figure out like, what are the essentials?
Yeah, it can be kind of a rabbit hole if you're not careful.
Yeah.
You can really get lost in the weeds with it.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of people, when they think about testing libraries,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, that's just for developers.
Right. Like, why should I care about that?
Right. But the truth
It
is,
impacts all of us.
it really does.
Anyone who uses software, even if we don't see the code.
Okay, so let's bring this down a little bit.
Oh.
What exactly a testing library?
So imagine a toolbox, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead of having hammers and screwdrivers and all that,
Okay.
this one's specifically filled with tools to check if your software is working the way it's supposed to.
Okay.
It's all about making sure the apps and websites we use every day are reliable and do what they should.
So it's almost like having like a team of tiny robots
Yeah.
that are just meticulously checking every little part of an app to make sure it works.
Pretty much.
But wouldn't that take forever?
That is where the library part comes in.
Okay.
These tools are made to, automate all those repetitive parts of testing.
Okay.
And that way it frees up developers
Okay.
to focus on actually, making cool features.
So less grunt work, more actual like innovation and getting those things out there.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you mentioned different types of testing libraries. Why is that?
Well, software is complex, right?
Okay.
Some libraries are for checking just tiny little snippets of code
Okay.
in isolation. That's called unit testing.
Gotcha.
And then others are for making sure that different parts of an app work together smoothly,
Okay.
like how the user interface talks to the database. That's integration testing.
Right.
And then you have end-to-end testing, which is basically like simulating a real user going through the entire app.
Okay, so we're starting to see the layers of complexity in the different types of testing.
Right.
But how do they actually work? I mean, we saw some JavaScript code in the research. Can we use that to break it down?
Yeah, for sure. Let's use that JavaScript as our guide, yeah.
Okay.
I know it can look a little intimidating at first.
We can.
But honestly, it's really logical when you break it down. Imagine you're following a recipe.
Okay, I can get on board with the recipe analogy.
Right. You have your ingredients,
Yeah.
which are kind of like the inputs to your code.
Yeah.
And then you're expecting some outcome, like a delicious cake.
Right.
That's like your output.
Right.
And testing libraries work the same way.
Right.
You set up the scenario like, if I do this to the app, this is what should happen.
So step one is like setting up the ingredients, or in this case, like configuring the testing library.
Yeah, that's the first part. But honestly, let's not get bogged down in the SAP details.
Okay.
Because the fun stuff is like writing the test cases.
Okay.
These are the instructions that tell the testing library what to actually check. Right.
It's basically saying like, if I click this button, I expect this window to pop up.
I'm starting to see how that connects to the robot user idea we were talking about earlier.
Right.
It's almost like the test case is the robot's mission.
Yeah, exactly.
Go here, do this, check this.
Exactly. And they need the tools to do these missions, right?
Right.
That's where the testing libraries provide all those tools to simulate user interactions.
Okay.
We saw that fire event example in the JavaScript code.
Yeah.
And that's literally how you make the robot click buttons or type text or do all the things a real user would.
Okay, so we have our robot user. They're following the test case instructions. They're interacting with the app.
Yeah.
But how do we actually know if the app passes the test?
That is where assertions come in. They're like the judge. They give you the verdict, right?
Right.
Did the app actually do what we expected?
Yeah.
So you can use the library's tools to say things like, after clicking that button, this specific text should appear on the screen.
And if it does, the test passes.
Okay.
If it doesn't, well, then it fails.
Okay, so it's not just interacting with the app, it's like verifying.
Yeah.
It responded the way it's supposed to
Yeah, exactly.
at each step.
At each.
But is a developer really going to like sit there and watch this robot user go through every single test case?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Remember automation.
Right.
Testing libraries typically use what are called test runners.
Okay.
These are tools that execute every single test automatically.
Okay.
And then they generate a report showing you what passed and what failed.
So it's like they have a little automated quality checker
Right.
running in the background as they're developing.
Exactly.
Now it's starting to make sense why these are so powerful.
Yeah.
But I'm still not quite getting why I should care. As someone who just uses apps,
Right.
I don't build them.
Okay, so let me ask you this, right?
Okay.
Have you ever used an app that's like Super buggy, it crashes all the time.
Yes.
Super
Yeah,
frustrating, right? Oh, yeah, the worst.
that's what testing libraries are trying to prevent.
Okay.
They're like a safety net, making sure
Mm.
the software we use every day is reliable and stable and works the way it's supposed to.
Okay, now you're talking my language.
Right.
I much prefer apps that don't crash in the middle of me doing something important.
Exactly. Yeah.
So by using these testing libraries, it's almost like developers are saying, hey, we care about your experience.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to put the extra effort in to make sure this is good for you.
Exactly. And when companies prioritize testing, it really shows they value quality.
Mm-hmm.
They're investing in making sure their software works well,
Okay.
which ultimately benefits all of us as users.
All right. I'm sold on the why
Right.
now.
Okay, good.
But testing just seems like it could get so complex,
Yeah.
especially for like really big applications.
Right.
How do developers even begin to tackle that?
Well, that's where those different types of testing that we talked about before come in.
Hmm.
Unit testing, integration testing, and end-to-end testing.
Yeah. They kind of give you a framework
Okay.
to approach testing in a systematic way, break it down into bite-sized chunks.
Gotcha.
And remember, these libraries automate so much of the heavy lifting.
Right.
It's not as daunting as it might seem at first.
Okay, so it's like having these different levels of testing
Mhm.
to catch problems at different stages.
Exactly.
But let's be real, nothing's perfect,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I'm guessing there are challenges and downsides to using these libraries too.
Oh, for sure. There are definitely challenges.
Yeah.
We'll definitely get into those.
Okay.
But before we get to all the, doom and gloom,
Right.
I think it would be helpful to look at some real-world examples
Okay.
of how companies are actually using these testing libraries to solve problems.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love seeing how it works in practice.
Yeah.
So let's dive into some real-world examples.
Let's do it.
What have you got?
All right. So remember that fintech company we were talking about?
Yeah.
The one building an expense tracker app with React? They're a perfect example of how testing libraries can really make a difference.
Okay, so real-world stuff here,
Oh, yeah.
not just theory.
Real-world problems.
I like it. So what kind of problems were they having?
Well, they were dealing with, a pretty classic problem, making sure things are accurate when it comes to money.
Right.
I mean, their app had to calculate totals, handle different currencies,
Yeah.
integrate with bank APIs, and on top of that, it had to be user-friendly.
Right.
Bugs in any of those areas
Right.
could have had some serious consequences.
Yeah, I would not want an error in my expense tracker telling me I have more money than I actually do.
Exactly. Nobody wants that.
So how did testing libraries help them avoid that kind of nightmare scenario?
Okay, so they used a combo of Jest, which is a popular JavaScript testing library for their unit testing,
Okay.
and then they used Cypress for their end-to-end testing
Mhm.
to simulate real user actions.
Okay.
And using both of these together actually allowed them to catch a really subtle error in their expense total calculation that could have totally been missed with just manual testing.
So it's not just like the catastrophic bugs, it's those tiny little things.
Yeah, the little things can be sneaky.
Yeah, that can really erode trust
Oh, for sure.
if your app is not doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Absolutely.
But testing everything seems like it would take forever.
Yeah.
Did they run into that problem at all, of it just slowing down development?
Actually, it was the opposite.
Really?
Because they had these automated tests in place, they could actually make changes to their code with way more confidence,
Yeah.
knowing that if they broke something, the tests would immediately let them know.
Gotcha.
And that faster feedback loop actually sped up their development process.
Okay.
They weren't afraid to, experiment or refactor their code
Right.
because they knew they had the safety net.
So it's like having a little guardian angel
Yeah, exactly.
on your
Just
shoulder. Being like, nope, that broke something. You need to fix that before it gets out there. But hold on, what about those different types of testing libraries?
Right.
We talked about unit, integration, end-to-end.
Mm-hmm.
How did those fit into this company's strategy?
So they used a layered approach.
Okay.
Unit tests, which they did with Jest, were like their first line of defense.
Okay.
They made sure that each individual component, like say a function that calculates a discount,
Okay.
was working correctly all on its own.
Gotcha.
Then they had Cypress running those end-to-end tests,
Okay.
which was like simulating a real user, going through that whole process of, adding an expense, categorizing it, and then checking their reports.
So it's like this multi-pronged attack on bugs.
Exactly.
Yeah, coming at it from different angles.
It's cover all your bases.
But isn't creating all those test cases and all those scenarios incredibly time-consuming?
It can seem that way, but remember,
Okay.
the libraries are automating the running of the tests.
Okay.
They're not manually clicking through every single thing. The developers, they write the test cases, but the tools actually do the running and report back anything that, goes wrong.
Okay, that makes a little more sense.
Yeah.
But even writing the test cases themselves seems like it'd be a lot of work.
Right.
Is there a way to make that more efficient?
For sure. There are definitely best practices for writing really good test cases.
Okay, best practices. I like it.
Yeah, and it's all about making your tests clear, concise, and really focused.
Okay.
One key principle is to make sure each test case is focusing on just one specific thing.
Okay.
You don't want to test too much at once because then if something goes wrong, it's hard to figure out where the problem is.
Gotcha. So keep it simple.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Keep it focused.
Keep it focused.
But how do you even know what to test?
Right.
I mean, there are so many different things a user could do in an app.
Yeah.
Do you have to test absolutely everything?
Well, that's where it gets a little tricky.
Okay.
And where human judgment comes in. You can't test every single possible thing.
Right.
So you have to prioritize.
Okay.
Focus on the core functionality of your app.
Yeah.
The things that absolutely have to work.
Right. The most important stuff.
Exactly. And the things where if something goes wrong, it has a big impact, like with financial calculations in this example.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Thoroughness, but we're also efficiency.
Exactly.
Can't test everything, but you got to test the important stuff.
Yeah, you got to be smart about it.
But wait, earlier we talked about mocking data.
Yeah.
How does that fit into all this best practice stuff?
So mocking data is super powerful.
Okay.
But you have to use it strategically.
Okay.
Remember, it's all about creating fake versions of things like APIs or databases.
Right.
That way you're isolating the code that you're testing.
Right. So you're controlling the inputs.
Exactly.
Make sure it's focused on that one specific thing.
Yeah. So let's say your app relies on a weather API.
Okay.
You can mock that API response to simulate different conditions. Like you can have sunny days, rainy days, even a blizzard.
Right.
And you can see how your app handles all of that without actually needing a real weather API.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But wouldn't relying too much on mocking potentially hide real-world problems?
That's a great point.
Like, what if the actual API behaves differently than your mocked version?
That's why it's so important to find that right balance.
Right.
Mocking's awesome for isolating components and making your tests more predictable.
Okay.
But you also need to test how your app actually interacts with those real external systems.
So you're saying there's a time and a place for mocking.
Exactly.
But it shouldn't completely replace real-world testing.
Yeah, you got to do both.
Gotcha.
And honestly, that's something experienced developers get really good at. They learn how to navigate that as they build these more complex applications.
Right.
They understand both are important for creating truly robust software.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But are there any, downsides to mocking?
There are a few, yeah.
Okay, like what?
Well, if your mocked data doesn't actually match what your app is going to see in the real world, your tests might pass even though your app would break in production.
Oh, so you could have a false sense of security?
Exactly.
Because your tests are passing, but it's because they're based on fake data.
Exactly. That's one thing to watch out for.
Okay, what else?
Another thing is that mocking can sometimes make your tests a little bit brittle.
Brittle.
Yeah. So if that external API you're mocking, if it changes its structure, your tests might start failing even though your app itself hasn't actually changed.
Okay.
So again, it's a trade-off. Like any tool, powerful when used correctly, but you got to be aware of the potential downsides.
Okay, so another best practice we need to talk about is edge cases.
Ah, edge cases, yes.
What are those?
Remember when we were talking about thinking like a mischievous user?
Yeah.
That's where edge cases come in.
Okay.
They're those unusual, unexpected scenarios that might not happen very often. Okay.
But they could really cause major problems if your app isn't ready for them.
All right, give me some examples.
Okay, so think about a form where a user is supposed to enter their age.
Okay, yeah.
What if they put in a negative number?
Right.
Or some ridiculously huge number?
Okay.
Or what if they just type in text instead of numbers?
Right.
Those are all edge cases.
So it's about testing those what if scenarios.
Yeah, what if?
The things a normal person might not think to do.
Exactly.
But that some creative or maybe really frustrated user.
Right, exactly.
Might try.
And by testing those weird cases,
Okay.
you can make your app much more robust
Right.
and prevent those unexpected errors that could really frustrate users
Okay.
or damage your reputation.
Right, because nobody wants a bad review.
Nobody wants a bad review.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this all ties together.
Yeah.
We've got our unit tests,
Mm-hmm.
checking those individual components,
Yeah.
end-to-end tests,
Right.
simulating those real user journeys.
And then these edge case tests
Yes.
that are trying to break things in new and interesting ways.
Exactly.
It's a multi-layered approach
Multi-layered, that's a great way to put it.
to making sure that your software is good.
Yeah, you want to make sure it can withstand anything.
But like anything,
Yeah.
there's got to be challenges.
Oh, for sure.
So what are some of the things that trip developers up
Right.
when they're working with these libraries?
Well, one common challenge is dealing with what we call flaky tests.
Flaky tests.
Yeah.
Okay, what are those?
So these are tests that, like, sometimes they pass and sometimes they fail,
Okay.
even if you haven't changed the code at all.
Ooh, that sounds frustrating.
Yeah, they're a pain.
It's like you can't trust the results.
Exactly.
What causes those?
Well, it could be a bunch of things.
Okay.
Sometimes it's timing issues.
Okay.
Sometimes it's dependencies on external factors.
Right.
Like if you need to be connected to the internet, or even just subtle differences in how the code runs in different environments.
So it's almost like the tests are introducing their own bugs
Yeah, it can feel that way.
into the process.
It definitely can.
So how do developers deal with flaky tests?
Well, sometimes you can pinpoint exactly what's causing it
Okay.
and you can fix it.
Right.
But a lot of times it's more about making your tests more robust.
Robust tests, what does that mean?
It means writing tests that are less sensitive to all those little variations that can cause flakiness.
Gotcha.
So, for example, instead of relying on an exact piece of text that might change, you might use a more general selector
Right.
that's targeting the element based on, like, its structure or its function rather
Yeah.
than the specific words.
Okay.
It's like making your tests more adaptable.
So it's like thinking ahead,
Yeah,
anticipating how things might change,
exactly. Got to be one step ahead.
even if that core functionality stays the same.
Exactly.
Okay. And I guess sometimes it's just about accepting that there's going to be some flakiness
Yeah.
and having strategies in place
Right.
to manage it.
Like you might retry a failed test a couple times
Okay.
before you decide it's a real failure.
Right. So it's not just like a one and done thing.
Nope.
Okay. So it's an art and a science.
It is, for sure.
This whole robustness thing.
Got to find that balance.
Another challenge we talked about earlier
Yeah.
was time.
Time, yes, always an issue.
If your tests take forever to run,
Right.
it slows everything down.
It can really bog things down.
So how do you manage that?
Well, remember those different types of tests we were talking about?
Oh.
Unit, integration, end-to-end?
Mm-hmm.
They all play a role in this
Okay.
unit tests because they're focused on those individual components. They're
Yeah.
usually really fast
Okay.
because they're isolated.
Right.
Integration tests take a little longer
Okay.
because you're checking how different parts work together.
Right.
And then end-to-end tests. They can be the most time-consuming, like, because you're simulating that whole user journey.
Right. So it's like having a toolbox
Mm-hmm.
with different size wrenches.
Right.
You're not going to use a sledgehammer for every job.
Exactly. You got to use the right tool for the job.
Okay. So a good testing strategy
Yeah.
will have all three of these
It's all about the mix.
working together.
Working together. Got to have a good mix.
But even with that, even with a well-designed strategy, testing still takes time
It does.
and effort.
Right.
Isn't there a risk that, like, when deadlines are looming,
Oh, yeah.
developers might just be like, I'm just going to skip the testing?
It's definitely a risk.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to make testing part of the development process from the very beginning.
Okay, so we haven't talked a lot about workflow.
Right.
What does that look like?
So imagine testing is like an afterthought,
Okay.
something you tack on at the end.
Yeah.
Developers are going to be way less likely to want to uncover bugs that could delay things.
Right.
But what if testing was just built into the whole development process?
Are there ways to do that?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, like what?
There's something called test-driven development, or TDD.
PDB.
TDD.
Okay.
It's kind of counterintuitive,
Okay.
but it's super effective.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So with TDD, you write the test before you even write the code.
Hold on. You write a test for code that doesn't exist yet.
Exactly.
That sounds backwards.
I know.
But I'm listening.
But it makes you really think about how you want your code to behave
Okay.
before you start writing it.
So it's almost like creating Like a blueprint
Yeah, like a set of specs.
for the code to meet.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that test just fail?
It
If
will.
the code isn't there yet.
That's the whole point.
Okay.
You start by writing a failing test
Okay.
that defines what you want to build,
Gotcha.
and then you write the code to make that test pass.
So the test is driving the code.
It is. It's leading the way. And this has some really cool benefits.
Like what?
Well, for one, it makes sure your code is testable from the get-go.
Right.
It also helps you create smaller, more modular components,
Right.
which are way easier to test and maintain.
Right.
And it makes you think about those edge cases and error handling up front.
So it's not just about the act of writing tests.
Right.
It's about changing the way you approach writing code.
Exactly. It's a mindset shift.
And then when testing's built in like that,
Yeah.
it's not seen as like this extra chore
It's just part of the process.
that you could just skip.
Exactly.
Okay, so TDD, interesting.
Yeah, it's a cool concept.
But even with that, code changes, features get added, things evolve.
Right?
How do you make sure those tests stay relevant?
That's where test maintenance comes in.
Okay, test maintenance.
It's like you'd update your application code.
Right.
You got to update your tests.
So it's an ongoing process,
It is, for sure.
not a one-time thing.
Keep those tests fresh.
And are there ways to make that more manageable?
Definitely.
Huh.
One key thing is to write tests that are resilient
Okay,
to
resilient.
change,
Okay.
meaning they're not going to break every time you tweak the UI or the underlying code.
So like we were talking about with the flaky tests.
Exactly.
But how do you actually make a resilient test?
Well, you want to use selectors that target elements based on what they do,
Okay.
rather than how they look or where they are on the page.
Right.
And you want to avoid hard coding values that might change over time.
Okay, so make your tests adaptable
Adaptable, yeah.
and less dependent on those specific details that could change.
Exactly.
And there are tools that can help with this.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Some libraries can actually identify tests that are affected by code changes
Oh, wow.
and even suggest updates.
So automation is coming in to help manage the tests themselves.
Exactly. The robots are helping us manage the robots.
It's robots all the way down.
It is. And, test maintenance might seem tedious,
Yeah.
but it's really an investment in the long-term health of your code base.
It's like preventative maintenance
It is,
for
exactly.
your software.
It might take some time up front, but saves you a lot of headaches down the road.
Okay, that makes sense.
Good.
We've talked a lot about the practical stuff.
We have.
The types of tests, the best practices, the challenges.
Mm,
But before we wrap up,
yeah.
I think it's worth taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture.
Okay.
The human element
The human element, yes.
of testing.
It's easy to get caught up in the technical stuff.
It is.
But at the end of the day, software is made by people for people.
Exactly. So what makes a good software tester?
Right.
What are those qualities?
That's a great question. So in my experience, a great software tester, it's a blend of technical skills for sure,
Okay.
but also, a certain mindset.
Okay.
It's not enough to just know how to use the tools.
Right.
You have to kind of approach software with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Skepticism.
Yeah. And also curiosity.
Skepticism and curiosity. That's an interesting combo.
It is. It is.
Tell me more.
Well, think about it.
Okay.
A good tester doesn't just assume the software works the way it's supposed to, right?
Right.
They're questioning those assumptions. They're poking around those edge cases,
Yeah.
trying to, break things.
Okay.
But all with the goal of finding those hidden flaws
Right.
or unexpected behaviors.
So they're almost like playing devil's advocate,
Yeah, kind of.
constantly challenging the software to prove itself.
Exactly. Got to make sure it can stand up to scrutiny.
But wouldn't that get kind of annoying for the developers?
It could, yeah, if it wasn't done in a collaborative way.
Right.
The best testers I've worked with, they understand that it's not about catching developers messing up.
Right.
It's about working together
Okay.
to build good software.
So it's finding that balance between like being critical, but also being collaborative.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
Okay.
And that's where curiosity comes in too.
Right.
A good tester is always asking, what if?
Yeah.
Exploring different scenarios, trying to figure out how things work under the hood.
So it's about having that like thirst for knowledge,
Yeah, that thirst for knowledge.
wanting to really understand the software.
Exactly, that deep dive mentality.
Right. But along with that intellectual curiosity,
Yeah.
I think empathy is important too.
Empathy, absolutely.
It's not a word I usually associate with testing.
I know, right?
How does that fit in?
Well, a good tester can put themselves in the user's shoes.
Oh,
They can anticipate what users need,
right.
what might frustrate them,
Yeah.
and even how they might use the software in ways that you didn't expect.
So it's about remembering that software is ultimately a tool for people.
Exactly.
And the user experience is really important.
It's everything.
Okay.
Because a tester who can empathize with the user,
Yeah.
they're more likely to find those issues that impact how usable the software is,
Right.
or how accessible it is,
Okay.
or even just how enjoyable it is to use.
This is making me realize that testing is a lot more nuanced and human-centric than I initially thought.
It really is.
It's not just about the code.
No, it's about the people.
Okay, so let's talk about how this is evolving.
Yeah.
What's on the horizon for software testing?
All right. So one trend that I'm really excited about is AI-powered testing tools.
AI in testing.
Yeah, it's coming.
That sounds very futuristic.
It is. It
Can
is.
you tell me more?
Well, AI can automate a lot of those really tedious tasks in testing,
Okay.
like generating test cases, analyzing results, things like that.
Right.
Imagine a tool that can learn from past testing cycles
Wow.
and then automatically identify those parts of the code that are more likely to have errors.
So it's almost like having this intelligent assistant
Yeah,
helping you focus your testing efforts.
right where they're needed most.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
It's powerful stuff.
What else can it do?
Well, it can also help with things like visual testing.
Visual testing.
Yeah, so it can compare screenshots of different versions of an app.
Okay. To spot any visual regressions.
So it's catching both the functional bugs and also, like, the visual bugs.
Exactly. Got to make sure everything looks good, too.
But doesn't this mean that, like, human testers are going to be out of a job?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I see it more as, like, AI is augmenting what humans can do,
Okay.
not replacing them.
Got
Like,
it.
say I can handle those things that can be automated,
Right.
which frees up human testers to focus on the stuff that needs human judgment,
Okay.
creativity, that empathy we were talking about.
Right, so it's humans and AI working together,
Teamwork makes the dream work.
each playing to their strengths.
Exactly. Got to
It-
play to your strengths.
Are there any other trends you're excited about?
There are, actually. There's this
Ah.
idea called shift-left testing.
Shift left.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's that?
So it's all about moving testing earlier in the development process.
Okay.
Traditionally, testing was kind of like this separate thing.
Right.
You did it after development was done.
Right. But with shift left, testing's integrated into every single stage.
Okay.
From the initial design to, actually writing the code.
So it's like that TDD idea,
Yeah, kind of.
but taken even further.
Exactly. Test early, test often.
And what are the benefits of that?
Well, you catch those bugs early on
Okay.
when they're easier and cheaper to fix.
Right.
It improves communication between developers and testers.
Okay.
And it just creates a more holistic approach to quality.
So it's breaking down those silos,
Exactly. Break down those walls.
making quality everyone's responsibility,
Everyone's got to own it.
not just the testing team.
Exactly.
Okay, so shift-left testing,
Yeah.
AI-powered tools.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else we should keep an eye on?
Oh, there's one more big one. Cloud-based testing platforms.
The cloud-based.
Yeah.
Okay.
These platforms, they give you access to a whole bunch of different testing tools
Okay.
and infrastructure on demand.
Okay.
So it's making it easier
Okay.
and more affordable for teams of any size to have really good testing strategies.
So the cloud is basically bringing the power of like enterprise-level testing
Exactly.
to anyone.
To the masses.
That's pretty awesome.
It is. It's really democratizing quality.
All right, so this has been a phenomenal deep dive
It has.
into testing libraries.
Yeah.
We've gone from, the basics to best practices to real-world examples
Mm-hmm.
to the future of testing.
The future is bright.
It is. I have to say, my initial skepticism about, how relevant this is to me
Right.
as a non-developer
Yeah.
is totally gone.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
It's so clear how important these are
Yeah.
for making sure that the software we all use
Mm-hmm.
is actually good.
Absolutely. It's all about that quality.
All right, so to wrap things up,
Yeah.
what's one key takeaway
Okay. Key takeaway.
you want our listeners to remember?
I would say this. Testing isn't just about finding bugs.
Okay.
It's about building confidence. Confidence in your code, confidence in your ability to deliver something valuable to your users, and confidence in the software that powers, pretty much everything these days.
That's a great way to put it.
I try.
And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with this final thought.
Okay.
As software becomes even more integrated into our lives,
Right.
the role of testing
Yeah.
becomes even more important.
Absolutely.
So let's all champion quality, demand excellence, and support the developers and testers out there.
Yes.
We're working so hard
Yeah.
to make sure that the software we use is reliable, secure, and Honestly, delightful to use.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
That's a wrap for today's deep dive.
See you next time.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a fascinating topic.
Sounds good.
Until then, stay curious.